Italian colonial period when they were colonizing Ethiopia, and made up a bunch of also fake stories about Ethiopian people using human shields, like children as human shields.
Yeah, exactly. So this is an Italian fascist version. So in the 30s, Italy colonized Ethiopia incredibly violently. The Ethiopians resisted quite ferociously, and the Italian army resorted to measures like using poison gas to try to break Ethiopian resistance. And there were cases where, so you mentioned Red Cross, and there were cases where Red Cross hospitals were bombed by the Italian Air Force, and they tried to justify this by saying, oh well, the Ethiopian resistance fighters are using hospitals as human shields. So this is a colonial propaganda poster trying to spread this narrative. Okay.
I'm just quoting.
So some little trivia for you. We just have a quote as well from Naftali Bennett, a former Israeli PM, who is also, strongly pushing this narrative that in one of the occasions where the Israeli army devastated Al-Shifa and murdered hundreds of people, that not a single civilian had been killed. So, as a famous Nazi said, Joseph Goebbels, the more, if you want a lie to be, the biggest lies are the most believable ones. We could perhaps move to a final trope, which was the one about mass rape, right? So this one was the narrative that Palestinian fighters on October 7th had engaged in mass rape. This was something that was alleged very quickly on October 7th and right after, and was immediately circulated by Western news channels without any kind of verification, really. The idea that 40, I'm sure you heard of the 40 beheaded babies thing that was later debunked, which we had kind of talked about earlier. Yes?
Baby in the oven?
The baby in the oven as well, yeah. I mean, there was a whole bunch of these, and both the decapitated babies, which again, it's a classic colonial trope, and this notion of mass rape, a lot of these stories were circulated by members of of a sort of right-wing religious Zionist organization called Zaka, which was one of the main organizations that arrived on the scene after October 7th, and they were involved in burying the dead, identifying the dead, etc. But none of these people were actually trained forensic people, and they're also ideologically, there's also a history of them, even the Israeli army treats their reports with a high degree of caution, because they have a history of making outlandish claims about a lot of things, not to mention that their founder has been accused of rape and sexual assault, but that's another story. So there was this accusation about mass rape that was made, there was no evidence pointing to mass rape having been deployed as a weapon. Obviously, in general, it's difficult to ascertain, for certain everything that happens on a battlefield. But we can say with confidence that there's absolutely no evidence that there was ever any kind of weaponization of mass rape by Palestinian fighters generally on October 7th. However, the mass rape allegations did play a central role in the the justification for the destruction of Gaza. And one important point was this New York Times article that came out in November, which basically, at a time when the Israeli propaganda effort was kind of losing steam, and if you want to read more about it, there's a very interesting Intercept article about it. But this is just a quote. The article galvanized the Israeli war effort at a time when even some of Israel's allies were expressing concern over its large-scale killing of civilians in Gaza. The New York Times podcast, The Daily, attempted to turn the article into an episode, but it didn't manage to get through a fact check. And then eventually, there was a Twitter user who started like posting all of this stuff that they had dug up about the author of this article. And it turned out that the author, Anat Schwartz, was one of the principal authors of the New York Times mass rape atrocity propaganda hoax. Not only expressed support for genocidal mass murder of Palestinians right before they received the New York Times job, but also served in the Israeli military's intelligence service. So there was all this context that started to like pop up right after this article was aired, and I mean it's been totally discredited since then. There's been, you know, by a number of outlets, again based on the fact that there just isn't the evidence to support any, you know, this incredibly serious allegation about the weaponization of mass rape, right? And yeah, I mean, what was I gonna say?
Just take you a few minutes. I'm recording now.
Yeah, I'm blanking, but I mean, yeah, basically you get the idea. Yeah.